What happens when a late-night interview goes from friendly banter to a full-blown confrontation that ends with one of the most powerful politicians in America storming off set? Tonight we're breaking down the moment Kamala Harris walked off Jimmy Kimmel's show after a clash that left the audience in stunned silence. Before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think about what went down. Now, let's dive into this. The interview started like any other late-night appearance. Kimmel welcomed Harris onto the stage, to applause from the audience, and the first few minutes felt routine. They exchanged pleasantries. Kimmel made a few light jokes about Washington politics, and Harris laughed along with her characteristic enthusiasm. But beneath the surface, you could sense something different in the air. Kimmel seemed more pointed than usual, and Harris, while smiling, had a guardedness in her responses that anyone paying attention could pick up on. About 5 minutes in, Kimmel shifted gears. He leaned forward in his chair and his tone changed from jovial to serious. "Madam Vice President," he said, "I want to ask you about something that's been on a lot of people's minds. There's been criticism about your visibility on certain issues, particularly from within your own party. How do you respond to people who say you've been too quiet when the country needs leadership?" Harris's smile tightened just slightly. "Jimmy," she said, "I think that's an interesting characterization. The reality is, I've been working every single day on behalf of the American people. Just because something isn't making headlines doesn't mean it isn't happening. We've been focused on real solutions, not soundbites." Kimmel nodded slowly, but his expression suggested he wasn't satisfied. Sure, he replied. "But I think what people are asking is, where have you been on the issues that are dominating the conversation? When there's a crisis, when there's a major national debate happening, shouldn't the vice president be front and center?" The audience was quiet now. This wasn't the playful back and forth they'd expected. Harris shifted in her seat, her posture straightening. "Jimmy, I've been exactly where I need to be," she said, her voice firm. "I've been in meetings with world leaders. I've been working with Congress. I've been in communities across this country. The idea that leadership only counts if it's performative, if it's on camera, is exactly what's wrong with our political discourse." Kimmel raised his hands in a gesture that seemed conciliatory but came across as patronizing. "I'm not saying it needs to be performative," he said, "but communication is part of leadership, right? People want to hear from their leaders. They want to know someone's fighting for them. And I think the frustration is that there have been moments where that voice has been missing." Harris's jaw tightened visibly. Her hands, which had been resting on the armrests of her chair, gripped them slightly. "I have to push back on that," she said, her tone now clipped. "What you're describing sounds a lot like the criticism that women leaders face constantly. We're either too visible or not visible enough. We're too aggressive or not assertive enough. I've spent my entire career navigating these double standards, and I'm not interested in playing that game on your show tonight." The audience let out a collective murmur. Some people clapped, others stayed silent. Kimmel looked momentarily caught off guard, but he recovered quickly. "Look, this isn't about gender," he said, his voice taking on a defensive edge. "I would ask the same question of any vice president. This is about accountability. When people have legitimate concerns about leadership, it's fair to ask those questions." Harris leaned forward now, her eyes locked on Kimmel. "Is it though?" she asked. "Because I don't recall you asking the previous vice president these kinds of questions with this kind of tone. I don't recall you questioning his visibility or his leadership in quite this way. So, forgive me if I'm skeptical about your framing here." The tension in the studio was palpable now. Kimmel's smile had completely vanished. He looked at Harris with a mix of surprise and irritation. "Madam Vice President," he said, "I think you're mischaracterizing my intentions here. I'm asking tough questions because that's what journalists do. That's what interviewers do. If you can't handle that, then maybe these appearances aren't the right forum for you." Harris let out a short, sharp laugh that had no humor in it. "Journalists?" she said. "Jimmy, You're a comedian. Let's not pretend this is Meet the Press. And I can handle tough questions just fine. What I won't tolerate is being talked down to or having my record distorted on national television for the sake of your ratings. The audience was dead silent now. A few people in the crowd looked uncomfortable. Others were leaning forward in their seats, completely absorbed. Kimmel's face had gone red. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, then opened it again. I am not, he said slowly, trying to distort anything. I'm asking questions that my audience wants answers to. And if that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe the problem isn't with my questions. Harris stood up slightly in her chair, her body language shifting from defensive to confrontational. The problem, she said, is that you're not actually interested in answers. You're interested in creating a moment. You're interested in a clip that will go viral, in a soundbite that will get shared on social media. That's not journalism, Jimmy. That's entertainment. And I didn't come here to be part of your entertainment. Kimmel stood up now too, his voice rising. You came on my show, he shot back. You knew what this was. Don't act like you're above it now because you don't like the questions. Every politician who sits in that chair knows what they're signing up for. You don't get to show up, plug your talking points, and then act offended when someone challenges you. The two of them were standing now, facing each other across the desk. The audience didn't know whether to clap, boo, or stay silent. Most chose silence. Harris's expression was steely, controlled but clearly furious. I'm not offended by being challenged, she said, her voice low and intense. I'm offended by being disrespected. There's a difference. And if you can't see that, then we have nothing more to discuss here. Kimmel threw his hands up. Fine, he said. If you want to leave, leave. But don't expect people to forget that you walked out when things got a little tough. That's going to be the story, not whatever point you think you're making right now. Harris stared at him for a long moment. The camera captured every second of the standoff, the silence stretching out uncomfortably. Then she reached up and unclipped her microphone. You know what the story is going to be, Jimmy, Harris said as she held the microphone in her hand. The story is going to be about a talk show host who thought he could bully a sitting vice president for applause. That's what people are going to remember. Kimmel scoffed, his arms crossed now. Bully? He repeated. Are you serious right now? I asked you legitimate questions, and you're acting like I attacked you. This is exactly what people are talking about when they say politicians can't handle criticism. Harris set the microphone down on the arm of her chair with deliberate slowness. Criticism and disrespect are not the same thing, she said. You can criticize my policies, you can question my decisions, you can disagree with everything I've done, but the way you've conducted yourself tonight, the way you've framed your questions, the tone you've taken, that crosses a line. Kimmel shook his head, laughing bitterly. What line? He asked. The line where I'm supposed to throw you softball questions and let you recite talking points? That's not how this works. Every guest who sits here gets the same treatment. You're not special. That's interesting, Harris said, her voice sharp. Because I've watched your show, Jimmy. I've seen how you interview people. I've seen the reverence you show some guests, the kid gloves you use, and I've seen the aggressive interrogations you reserve for others. So don't tell me everyone gets the same treatment. We both know that's not true. The audience was shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This had gone so far beyond a typical late-night interview that no one quite knew how to react. Kimmel's producer could be seen off-camera, making frantic gestures, but neither Kimmel nor Harris was paying attention. Okay, Kimmel said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, so now I'm biased. Is that what you're saying? I'm part of some conspiracy against you? Harris's eyes flashed. Don't twist my words, she said. I'm saying you came into this interview with an agenda. You wanted confrontation. You wanted a viral moment. And now you're getting one, just not the way you planned. Kimmel stepped around his desk now, closing the distance between them slightly. The camera operators scrambled to adjust their angles. Maybe I did want tough questions answered, he admitted. Maybe I did think the American people deserve to hear you defend your record instead of hiding behind carefully crafted statements. Is that so wrong? Is accountability really such an offensive concept to you? Harris stood her ground, not backing away an inch. Accountability? She said. You want to talk about accountability? Let's talk about the accountability of media figures who use their platforms to grandstand and score political points. Let's talk about the accountability of entertainers who masquerade as journalists when it suits them. You want accountability? Look in the mirror, Jimmy. The audience gasped. A few people started clapping but stopped when they realized most of the crowd was silent. Kimmel's face was flushed now, his composure cracking. You don't get to come on my show and lecture me, he said, his voice rising. This is my show, these are my questions, and if you don't like it, there's the door. Harris smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Is that what this is about? She asked. Your show? Your platform? Your ego? I thought this was supposed to be about informing the public, about having meaningful conversations. But I see now what this really is. This is about you feeling powerful, about you being the one in control. Well, I have news for you, Jimmy. I don't need your platform. I don't need your validation. And I certainly don't need to sit here and be treated like I'm on trial. Kimmel pointed at her, his finger jabbing the air. You are on trial, he said. That's what public office means. Every day you're in that position, you're on trial with the American people. And part of that trial is sitting in chairs like this one and answering hard questions. If you can't do that, then maybe you're not cut out for the job. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Harris's expression went from angry to ice cold. Her voice, when she spoke, was quieter but somehow more forceful. You have no idea what this job requires, she said. You sit behind a desk and make jokes and interview celebrities and think that gives you insight into governance, into leadership, into what it takes to serve this country. You don't know the first thing about the sacrifices, the impossible decisions, the weight of responsibility that comes with this office. Kimmel laughed harshly. Oh, here we go, he said. The martyr routine. Poor vice president, having to answer questions from the mean talk show host. Do you hear yourself right now? Do you hear how out of touch you sound? Harris took a step toward him, her voice rising now to match his. Out of touch, she said. You want to talk about out of touch? You make more money in a year than most Americans will see in a lifetime. You perform for wealthy audiences in Hollywood studios. You're surrounded by yes men and producers who laugh at all your jokes, and you have the audacity to call me out of touch? The audience was completely riveted now, watching this exchange like a tennis match. Some people had their phones out, clearly recording despite studio rules. Kimmel's hands were clenched at his sides. At least I earned my success, he shot back. I didn't ride coattails into power. I didn't benefit from political machines and backroom deals. I built my career from the ground up. Harris's laugh was sharp and cutting. You think I didn't earn this? She said. You think I didn't work twice as hard as everyone around me to get where I am? You think being a woman, being a person of color in politics, is some kind of advantage? That's the most privileged, ignorant thing I've heard all night. Kimmel's producer was now on stage, trying to get between them, but both Kimmel and Harris ignored him completely. I'm not saying you didn't work hard, Kimmel said, but don't act like you're some kind of hero just for showing up. You're a politician. You make promises, you break them, you spin narratives. That's what politicians do. And when someone calls you out on it, you cry foul. Harris's composure finally cracked completely. Her voice, controlled throughout most of this exchange, now carried real anger. I have dedicated my life to public service, she said. I have fought for people who had no voice. I have taken on systems of power that tried to silence me. I have made enemies of people far more powerful than you by doing what I believed was right. And I will not stand here and let a talk show host reduce that to some cynical political game. Kimmel spread his arms wide. Then don't, he said. Leave. Walk out. Prove everyone right who says you can't handle pressure. Go ahead. But know that every single person watching this is going to see you running away from a conversation because it got uncomfortable. Harris stared at him for a long, tense moment. The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the cameras. When she finally spoke, her voice was deadly calm. "I'm not running away from anything," she said. "I'm choosing not to dignify this circus with my presence any longer. There's a difference. And if you or your audience can't understand that, that's not my problem." She turned away from Kimmel, facing the audience now. "To those of you watching at home," she said, her voice clear and direct, "I want you to know that I will always stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs me politically. But I will not be disrespected, I will not be talked down to, and I will not participate in media spectacles that prioritize conflict over truth." Kimmel moved back behind his desk, gripping it with both hands. "Spoken like a true politician," he said bitterly. "Lots of words, no answers. That's what we got tonight, folks. A masterclass in deflection." Harris didn't respond to him. She was already walking toward the edge of the stage. The cameras followed Harris as she moved toward the stage exit. Kimmel called after her, his voice carrying across the studio. "That's it?" he said. "You're really just going to walk out? This is what leadership looks like to you?" Harris stopped at the edge of the stage, turning back to face him one last time. "Leadership," she said, her voice projecting to every corner of the studio, "is knowing when a conversation has value and when it's just noise. This, Jimmy, is noise." Kimmel moved from behind his desk, following her partway across the stage. "You can frame this however you want," he said, "but everyone watching knows what really happened here. You came on expecting softball questions, and when you didn't get that, you couldn't handle it." Harris shook her head slowly. "The truth," she said, "is that you confused aggression with journalism. You confused rudeness with courage. I've been questioned by actual journalists who challenged me with respect and professionalism. What you did tonight wasn't journalism. It was a performance." The audience was completely split now. Some clapping for Harris, others calling out support for Kimmel. Kimmel's hands went up in exasperation. "A performance," he repeated. "That's rich coming from someone who's made a career out of performing. At least I'm honest about what I do." Harris's eyes narrowed. "You invited me here because you wanted ratings," she said. "You wanted a moment that would trend on social media. You decided that the way to get that was to be antagonistic, to push buttons. Well, congratulations, Jimmy. You got your moment." Kimmel's voice was sharp. "I invited you here because I thought you might actually answer some questions," he said. "But instead, you're hiding behind this victim narrative, acting like you're too important to be questioned. That's not leadership. That's arrogance." Harris took a step back toward him. "Arrogance," she said quietly, "is thinking that you, a late-night comedian, have the right to lecture me about leadership. Arrogance is believing your platform gives you authority you haven't earned. You want to call me arrogant? Look in the mirror." Kimmel's jaw was tight. "I've used this platform to speak truth to power," he said. "And yeah, sometimes that means asking tough questions to people who aren't used to being challenged." Harris's laugh was bitter. "Speaking truth to power?" she repeated. "Jimmy, you are power. You have a television show, a massive audience, wealth, influence. Tonight, you used your power to try to humiliate me on national television. That's not brave. That's cowardly." The word hit Kimmel visibly. "Cowardly," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You want to talk about cowardly? How about walking away when a conversation gets difficult? That's cowardly." Harris held his gaze steadily. "I'm not walking away from a difficult conversation," she said. "I'm walking away from a hostile interrogation. I'm walking away because I value my dignity more than I value your approval. If that makes me cowardly in your eyes, I can live with that." She turned to leave again, and several audience members stood up, some clapping, some shouting. Kimmel's voice rose above the noise. "This is what people need to see," he called out. "This is the real Kamala Harris." Harris stopped, speaking over her shoulder. The real Kamala Harris, she said, is someone who knows her worth. Someone who doesn't need validation from people who build themselves up by tearing others down, and someone who knows when to walk away from toxicity. Kimmel shook his head. This is unbelievable, he muttered, loud enough for the microphones to catch. Fine, go, but don't expect an invitation back. Harris turned back one last time. Let them judge, she said simply. I've been judged my entire life. If the judgment I face is for refusing to be disrespected on your show, I'll wear that with pride. With that, she walked off the stage. The audience erupted, some cheering, others booing, most just stunned. Kimmel stood in the middle of his stage, looking lost, before walking back to his desk and sitting down heavily. Well, he said, his voice lacking its usual energy, that just happened. He cleared his throat. Look, I asked tough questions. I think that's fair. But clearly, the vice president disagreed. So, make of that what you will. He looked tired suddenly, uncertain in a way viewers had rarely seen. We're going to take a quick break, he said quietly. As the show cut to commercial, the cameras lingered on Kimmel's face, capturing the weight of what had just happened. So there you have it. The full story of how a late-night interview turned into one of the most dramatic moments in recent television history. Was Kimmel out of line with his questioning? Or was Harris too sensitive to legitimate criticism? Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. And drop your thoughts in the comments below. Who was in the right here, Kimmel or Harris? Let me know.